In order to deal with the disorders of emotional life, it is necessary to start with a baseline, hence this first session on concepts of normality.
I understand your husband has recently died. How have you been feeling?
Oh, just dreadful.
Have you been able to sleep?
No, it's just been dreadful. I just carry his picture with me. It's very hard, you know, when you've been married 50 years and all of a sudden he's gone.
Have you been able to eat?
Does this lady need counseling, antidepressants, or treatment of any type?
How is your energy level?
Or does she represent an uncomplicated early grief reaction, a painful but natural response to loss? Ask yourself about all those persons you know. Is there anybody who is completely normal in every respect? Or do we all have eccentricities that makes the boundary between normal and abnormal somewhat blurry? Having within your own mind an idea of what normal is will help you to know when to intervene. In order to understand these phenomena best, we need to know how the mind actually functions. Simply put, we can look at the four basic functions of the mind and the backdrop against which those functions occur. In order to understand this more easily, perhaps we should refer to a diagram. Consider the mind as similar to a knee jerk. That is, there is something that goes in, something happens inside, and then there is an output. In the case of the mind, the input is known as perception. The output is known as behavior, both motor and verbal. What happens within constitutes thinking and its subdivisions and feeling. As far as the background is concerned, this is the sensorium, consisting of two elements, both a level of consciousness and orientation to time, place, and person. What we'll do now is look at each of these 5 areas. Sometimes, even though the person has these experiences, they realize in some way that they're not real. This refers to a phenomenon that we call pseudo-hallucinations. In this instance, they actually see or hear what goes on, and they perceive it accurately in the sense that it's outside of themselves, but they know that it's not real. Let me give you an example. Some years ago, I was asked to see a woman who was in chronic renal failure. She was extremely toxic, and in that toxic state, she saw on the wall opposite her bed a very frightening visual phenomenon. It was the head of a gigantic fish with its mouth open, coming through the wall at her. She could even identify the 2 sharp rows of teeth on the upper and lower jaws of this fish. She was terrified, and understandably so. She called for a nurse to come and assist her, and when she pointed to the blank wall and in a frightened tone of voice said, "Do you see it? Do you see it?" The nurse, regrettably, not really being trained that well in emotional life, said, "Yes, I do," thinking that this might relieve her of her anxiety. Instead, it had the opposite effect, that the woman became more agitated, and this was when psychiatry was called. What is the definition of normal thinking? Well, some people have said that it is a flow of ideas connected by logic, stimulated by a question or a problem, that leads to an answer or a solution that is based in reality. In other words, thinking is goal-directed. There are 2 real aspects to thinking that we could look at. One is thought content, what we think. The other has to do with thought process or form, which is how we think. But perhaps the best way to look at thinking is to use a graphic. Here, each dot represents an idea, and between the parallel lines could be seen the flow of connected dots that leads ultimately to the goal that we are searching for. Let me give you another definition. In normal thinking, logical means a succession of interconnected thought contents. We reject some ideas, or we select them out in order to achieve an answer. The succession of thoughts must relate to the clues given, as is illustrated by the diagram. Let's take a look now at some of the specific disorders of thought process The first three are circumstantiality, tangentiality, and perseveration. The latter three being loose associations, clang associations, and verbigeration. Sometimes a drawing helps to illustrate exactly what we mean. If we look now at circumstantiality, we can see how a normal thought we would want to go from point A on the left to point B on the right. However, in circumstantiality, there is an enormous amount of beating around the bush, as it were, until we actually reach the goal. The important thing to realize is that the goal is reached ultimately. It's important to observe and record accurately what you see in an interview. Most mental status exams start with a category called general appearance and behavior, meaning how does the person come across in the interview setting. You may be asked, for example, to describe their age and whether it appears that they are older, younger, or compatible with the age that they give you. Their state of dress or undress or dishevelment will be important. How they sit or lie or stand or walk in the interview, their posture generally, is also observed. Their facial expression can tell a lot or a little. Are they animated? Is it flat? Anything in between? All of these things are to form part of the examination profile. Even the motor activity of the interview. Are they fidgeting? Are they rubbing cords together? Are they clasping and unclasping their hands? Are they leaping out of the chair? Do they sit with their legs tucked up underneath them? These sorts of motor activities and postures can tell a lot. After all, humans do communicate not just by words alone. Their speech, whether it's spontaneous, whether it's slurred, whether it's fast, whether it's slow, all of these things also form part of the record. Inference is made also about general information that the person has, as well as their intelligence. Ask them about. Sometimes people have ideas which nobody else seems to believe, but the ideas sometimes are that there's somebody out there who's going to deliberately harm them. Have you ever had an idea like that?
Physically, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
No. When I was in high school, a couple of times I thought a couple of guys were going to beat me up.
And if
they never did.
They never did. Okay. And in recent times, have you ever had that experience that you've become convinced that somebody's going to harm you?
Not physically.
No? Okay. Have you ever had the feeling or belief that you have special powers that other people on this planet don't have?
Not unless screwing things up is a power, I don't know.
Okay. To what extent in the last while have you found your thoughts turning toward life not being worth living?
Well, I've got the gun out in the workshop now. That's where I keep the ammunition.
And do you find yourself thinking about using the gun?
Yeah. There's not really any way out of this mess I'm in.
And is this a passing thought that comes and goes, or do you find yourself thinking a lot about it?
No, it's occupying a lot of my time anymore.
And is there some reason why you haven't acted on this thought so far?
I don't know. I just keep thinking there must be a different answer, but it keeps coming out the same.
Okay. You will notice that I spent a fair amount of time going over disorders of thought content, picking out, for example, things like phobias and delusions. What I did not specifically ask for were disorders of thought process. And if you remember from the previous tapes on nosology and phenomenology, these refer to phenomena such